Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day, it's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. By the time I dragged myself into the village, the afternoon was already surrendering to shadow. No soul stirred upon the single track threading between houses hewn from the very bones of the earth. Ancient timber doors, scarred and stoic, punctuated the stone, their heavy shutters drawn taut like eyelids against the dying light. The air, thin and sharp, carried the chill of the looming hills whose dark shoulders hunched behind the rooftops. Cars were an alien concept here, streetlights an unimaginable luxury. Weariness was a physical weight upon me, my meager possessions, spare clothes, a torch, a near-empty water flask, feeling heavier with every step in my small pack. Shelter, even for a single night, had become an urgent need. One dwelling, set slightly apart, projected an air of profound desertion. Its walls were a mosaic of rough-fitted stone, the small wooden door deeply recessed, defiant. The windows, narrow slits sunk into the thick walls, held panes of uneven, distorting glass. Hesitantly, I tested the door. It yielded with a low groan, releasing a chill breath redolent of weeping stone and the fine grit of ages. Inside, a single downstairs chamber offered Spartan comfort. A plain table, a solitary chair, a hearth cold and dark. A tight twist of stairs climbed into the gloom above. I ascended, my footsteps swallowed by the quiet. The upper room held a narrow bedstead bearing a thin, flattened mattress, a squat wooden chest, and one window gazing out towards the encroaching hills. A simple iron latch secured the door. The floorboards beneath my boots were warped and uneven, complaining softly with each shift of my weight. The bed, at least, felt dry. Unburdening myself, I arranged my few belongings on the chest, resolving to rest here until morning light granted passage onward. As the last vestiges of sun drained from the sky, a wind began to keen, probing the minuscule fissures around the window frame, its touch palpable within the room's deepening cold. I sat on the edge of the bed, peering out. Moonlight, surprisingly stark, silvered the contours of the land beyond. Near a cluster of neighboring houses, dark figures stood sentinel, motionless effigies against the pale ground. They did not stir. I watched them, straining to discern feature or garb, but distance and shadow rendered them mere shapes, inscrutable. For a long moment, I held them in my gaze, then turned away, focusing on the rough texture of the interior wall. When my eyes returned to the window, the space they had occupied held only deepening shadow. They had vanished. Night sealed the village completely. Darkness pooled in the room, thick and absolute. My torch beam sliced through it, momentarily reassuring as I checked the door's latch. Solid, primitive, secure enough. Outside, the wind gathered force, rattling the window in its frame, the glass shivering, the old wood groaning as if strained to its limit. For a sliver more peace, I wedged the room's lone chair beneath the door handle. A prickling unease settled over me. The silence within the house felt wrong, devoid even of the scuttling sounds of unseen life. Only the wind howled its desolate song. Then, beneath the wind's cry, a different sound surfaced. Low, insidious, drifting from just outside the window. Not speech, but a faint, pervasive humming, a vibration that resonated less in the ears and more in the bones. I extinguished the torch, crept towards the glass. Silhouettes swayed against the moonlit backdrop, several of them, their limbs moving with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Compelled, I leaned closer, seeking faces, and found eyes. Orbs of flat, unnerving white stared back, pupilless voids reflecting the cold moonlight, fixed directly upon me. I recoiled, breath catching, heart hammering against my ribs. My hand clenched on the damp stone sill. I forced a steadying breath. Though no distinct words reached me, an undeniable sense of chanting permeated the air, a texture rather than a sound, soft, alien, without discernible syllables, yet insistent. The wind slammed against the window again, the glass bowing inwards with a frightening elasticity. It seemed poised to shatter. My attention snapped downwards. Through the soles of my boots, I felt something. A faint vibration from the floorboards, accompanied by a dry, furtive scrabbling. Crouching, I pressed my ear to the rough wood. The sound was subtle, yet undeniable. Something sliding, dragging itself beneath the floor. An animal, perhaps? A rat grown monstrously large? No, the sound held a weight, a deliberate quality that belied mere vermin. I straightened, casting an anxious glance at the door. The chair remained steadfast. The latch held. Opening it felt unthinkable. What waited in the Stygian darkness beyond? My torch beam swept the room again, confirming the stark emptiness. Bare stone walls, the solid chest at the bed's foot. I lifted its lid. Inside lay a neatly folded, coarse blanket and a small tarnished metal box, empty. I spread the blanket over the thin mattress, a futile gesture against the encroaching chill, both physical and psychic. I strained my ears. Outside, the relentless wind, the unsettling, wordless hum that rose and fell like a tide. Inside, the groaning protest of aged timber. The bed itself seemed to tremble faintly, a tremor transmitted from below. Placing a hand on the frame, I felt it. A definite vibration pulsing up through the floor. Curiosity overriding caution, I pulled back a corner of the thin, dusty rug near the bed. A single floorboard looked looser than its neighbors. I pressed down. It resisted, but yielded slightly. Pulling harder risked noise I couldn't afford. Through the window, the shapes persisted, their slow swaying unbroken, always oriented towards my vigil. Their luminous eyes, unblinking, seemed to track my every movement. I watched their heads tilt in eerie synchrony as they rocked. A tentative tap of my finger against the glass elicited no reaction. They merely continued their silent, rhythmic motion, their ceaseless, soundless humming. Were their mouths moving? It was impossible to tell, lost in silhouette against the stark moonlight. Only the outlines and those pale, watching eyes. A sudden pressure built in my ears, the very air thickening. Simultaneously, the sound beneath the floor intensified. A distinct scraping now, punctuated by a low, grating noise. I scrambled back from the center of the room, pressing myself against the cold stone wall, gripping the torch like a weapon, its beam aimed at the floor. Dust motes danced in the light, rising from the seams between the trembling boards. My heart threw itself against my ribs. Escape. The thought hammered at me. But were those figures also waiting by the door downstairs? Stealing towards the room's exit, I pressed my ear against the rough wood. Silence from the stairwell. Cautiously, I drew back the chair, lifted the latch with painstaking slowness. The door opened onto a blackness deeper than the room's. The staircase descended into utter void. Torch held low, casting distorted shadows, I crept downwards, each step on the uneven treads of potential betrayal. The downstairs chamber was frigid, desolate. My light skimmed over the familiar table and chair, the cold maw of the fireplace. I swung the beam towards the main door, the one leading outside, closed. I grasped the handle. It refused to turn. I threw my weight against it, immovable. Panic flared. Directing the light along the door's edges revealed the problem. The seams were choked, sealed fast by thick ridges of what looked like desiccated earth, hard as stone. My fingernails scraped uselessly against it. I lacked any tool adequate to break the seal. The house itself held me captive. A sharp crack echoed from upstairs, wood splintering. I spun, scrambling back up the narrow stairs, bursting into the upper room. The loose floorboard had lifted further, creating a distinct gap. Something was levering it from beneath, a pale edge momentarily visible. I stabbed the torch beam into the opening. Darkness swallowed the light, but not before I glimpsed a flash of something bone-white retreating instantly from the beam. I retreated myself, planting my feet, keeping the light trained on the gap. My hands trembled violently. My mouth felt like parchment. A shuffling, scraping sound resumed beneath the floor, now seeming to circle the perimeter of the room, a dry, unsettling crawl just below my feet. On impulse, I dragged the heavy wooden chest, its feet screeching obscenely on the boards, positioning it over the disturbed section of flooring. A moment of silence followed the racket. Then the scraping began anew, tracing the edges of the room, relentless. Outside, the humming intensified, pressing in, vibrating within my skull. I forced my gaze back to the window. The silhouettes were closer now, pressed almost against the exterior wall. Their eyes bored into the room. No mouths moved, yet the sense of their collective drone was deafeningly clear. I avoided looking directly at those glowing orbs. The wind shrieked, and the window shuddered violently, threatening imminent collapse. A sudden, powerful jolt from beneath the floor shifted the chest slightly. I braced my foot against it, but it slid again, tilting. Whatever resided below possessed surprising strength. The floorboards groaned ominously. Frantically, I scanned the room for anything else heavy. The bed was too flimsy, the chair useless. Leaving the room was no longer an option. The sealed door downstairs, the unknown layout of the rest of the house, the sheer stone faces outside. This place felt hermetically sealed. Leaning onto the chest with my full weight, I felt the vibrations course through me. My breath came in ragged gasps. Then the tapping began. Softly at first, then more insistently, the figures outside began to rap upon the window pane, a delicate, skeletal percussion. Tiny fracture lines spiderwebbed across the glass. I shone the torch directly at them. They flinched back marginally, but remained, their tapping resuming. Slow, rhythmic, testing. The floorboard beneath the chest finally gave way with a sickening crack. I leapt back as the chest lurched, tilting precariously. A long, thin object thrust upwards through the gap, grayish, rough-textured, like a gnarled, ancient branch or bone. It twisted, scraping against the wood of the chest. Acting purely on instinct, I kicked at it. My boot connected solidly. The object spasmed and withdrew instantly, vanishing below. A final, receding scrape, and then silence from beneath the floor. I gasped for air, chest tight, wiping cold sweat from my brow. The silhouettes hammered the window again. A sharp ping, and a small shard of glass fell inwards, admitting a sliver of icy air. Through the resulting peephole, a single, luminous white eye stared in. I stumbled back, raising the torch, aiming the beam squarely at the eye. The figure outside jerked away from the opening. The light, it deterred them. Hope, thin but fierce, flickered within me. I kept the beam fixed on the window. Beneath the floor, the scraping noise moved towards a far corner, followed by a dull thump. Then, nothing. I stood frozen, torch aimed at the window, listening intently. The wind howled, but the scraping had ceased. The chanting outside persisted, a constant pressure, but the figures kept a slight distance from the hole in the glass, their tapping now directed at the window frame, probing its strength. I swept the torch beam back and forth, forcing them to remain slightly back. How long would the batteries last? The thought was a cold serpent coiling in my gut. I pushed it away. The roof timbers groaned overhead. Dust sifted down. Stay awake. Stay alert. I paced the confines of the small room, a caged animal. I checked the gap under the chest again, still partially open, but seemingly quiescent. I kept the light trained on it for long moments. Nothing stirred. My legs ached with fatigue, but sitting felt like surrender. The rhythmic tapping on the frame, the insidious hum, the memory of the thing beneath the floor. They kept me upright, wired with adrenaline. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My breathing remained shallow and fast. Slowly, agonizingly, the quality of the darkness outside began to shift. A subtle dilution, a lessening of the absolute black. Though the wind still raged, a fragile, pearlescent light began to stain the eastern horizon. As if sensing this change, the silhouettes outside drew back, melting into the deeper shadows congregating around the other houses. Their humming seemed to thin, to recede. I watched, scarcely daring to breathe, as they retreated, leaving the space directly before my window vacant once more. The tapping ceased. A final, faint scrape echoed from beneath the floor, then absolute silence descended within the house, broken only by the wind's mournful passage. I waited, torch beam still sweeping the gap, the window. Nothing. Cautiously, I approached the window. Empty laneways, stone houses stark against the nascent dawn. The watchers were gone. The only sound now was the wind, stripped of its unnatural accompaniment, whistling through the unseen cracks in the ancient walls. Downstairs, I had to try the door again. Leaving the violated upper room, I descended into the chill morning air pooling in the lower chamber. I attacked the seal around the door with renewed desperation, using a splintered piece of the chair leg I'd kicked loose earlier. Minutes of frantic scraping and chipping finally dislodged enough of the hardened mud. The latch yielded. I wrenched the door open. Cold, clean air flooded in, smelling of damp earth and distance. The street outside lay deserted, silent under the pale sky. No figures lurked, no eyes watched. I stepped across the threshold, out of the stone embrace of that house, the relief of open space profound. Without a backward glance at the window, at the room with its violated floor, I began to walk, quickly putting distance between myself and the village. The silence of the stone settlement remained unbroken. I just kept moving, fueled by the grim certainty that dawn was only a temporary reprieve in such a place. The asphalt ribboned into the encroaching dark, hours dissolving until exhaustion felt like grit beneath Elias's eyelids. Miles blurred, the highway hypnotized. Then a structure materialized roadside, skeletal against the gloom. The Starlight Motel, its neon sign sputtering a weak pulse. Logic had fled hours ago. The need for stillness, for a horizontal surface, overruled the peeling paint and air of quiet decay. He surrendered, guiding the car onto the cracked pavement, the engine's sigh lost in the vast quiet. The lobby was a cramped box, smelling faintly of dust and forgotten things, inhabited only by a spectral figure behind a high counter. This custodian of the night, perhaps named Silas, perhaps nameless, offered minimal interaction. A key slid across the worn formica, accompanied by a low murmur about departure times, before his attention retreated into whatever shadows occupied him behind the desk. Elias cared little. The key, cool metal in his palm, was a promise of oblivion. His assigned room lay deep within a corridor that stretched like an exhale, its door facing a barren parking lot bathed in the sickly yellow cast of a single sentinel street lamp. He turned the lock, the click echoing slightly, and shut the world out, securing the deadbolt. Bare bulbs, a bed sagging slightly in the middle, a scarred dresser, the ubiquitous television bolted high on the wall. The room was an archetype of transient lodging. Wallpaper, patterned with faded, indecipherable blooms, curled away at the seams. The faint tang of industrial cleaner couldn't quite mask an underlying mustiness. It was sufficient. Elias let his travel bag thud to the threadbare carpet, kicked off his shoes and inhaled deeply, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. Relief, finally. A film of road grime clung to his skin, demanding removal. He pushed open the bathroom door, flicking the switch. The light hesitated, buzzed angrily, then settled into a harsh glare. Twisting the shower taps, he waited for the water to shed its icy chill. And that's when his gaze snagged on it. Beside the sink, low on the wall, a flaw in the plaster. Not a crack, but a hole. Small, no wider than a pen, yet perfectly round, drilled with an unnerving precision. It seemed to pierce straight through to the adjoining room. He leaned closer, narrowing his eyes. An artifact of some clumsy repair, perhaps? A forgotten anchor point for a long-removed fixture? Yet its neatness felt wrong, intentional. A disquiet stirred within him. Shaking his head, dismissing the flicker of unease, he ripped a wad of tissue from the dispenser and plugged the tiny orifice, smoothing it down. A temporary fix, obscuring the dark spot. The shower was brief, the spray barely warm, his mind refusing to settle. That prickling sensation, the feeling of being observed, clung tighter than the damp towel. Back in the main room, he sought refuge in the television's electronic babble, flicking through static-laced channels before landing on the flickering ghosts of an old comedy. But his focus frayed. His attention pulled magnetically towards the closed bathroom door. He imagined an eye pressed to the other side of that small, plugged void. Then, a sound. Soft, hesitant, a tap. From the bathroom wall. Elias went rigid, the canned laughter from the TV suddenly absurd. His heart gave a painful lurch. It was faint, barely there, yet distinct from the motel's groans and sighs. He sat frozen, ears straining against the manufactured cheer, listening for a repeat. Silence returned, thick and watchful. Nerves, he told himself, just the fatigue playing tricks, the ancient plumbing rattling its bones. He forced a breath, willing the tension from his neck, turning back to the screen. Tap, tap. Louder this time, sharper. A chill traced its way up his spine. Reluctance warred with a morbid compulsion. He rose, moving with a slow deliberation that felt alien, and pushed open the bathroom door. The harsh light glared back. Everything appeared unchanged, except the tissue plug was gone, simply vanished. He stared at the empty hole, a dark pupil in the pale wall. Someone had removed it. From the other side, a tremor started in his hands. With fumbling fingers, he tore off another clump of tissue, larger this time, forcing it into the hole with more pressure than necessary. He backed away, breath catching in his throat, trying to rationalize, trying to quell the rising panic. The feeling intensified. He was not alone. Retreating, he closed the bathroom door, the click of the latch loud in the stillness. He perched on the edge of the bed, eyes locked on the door, listening. Minutes stretched, taut as wire. Then a new sound, a faint, dry scratching, like fingernails drawn lightly across plaster. Bile rose in his throat. He didn't want to look. He had to look. Rising again, drawn by an invisible thread, he crossed the small space. He reached for the knob, turned it, swung the door inward. The tissue was gone. Again. The hole gaped, vacant and mocking. His stomach plunged. He pressed his ear to the cool plaster beside the void, listening intently. Nothing but the frantic thrum of his own blood. Slowly, he backed out, pulling the bathroom door shut, turning the lock this time. He sank onto the bed again, the flimsy mattress springs groaning beneath him. It's nothing. An old building, strange drafts, maybe even rodents in the walls. His mind scrambled for explanations, anything to dispel the suffocating certainty that someone was adjacent, aware, playing a game. Every creak of the building, every distant car passing on the highway seemed amplified, menacing. The television droned on, unnoticed. His gaze remained fixed on the locked bathroom door, imagining the wood splintering inward. Who was in the next room? The impassive night clerk, indulging some perverse curiosity, or something less definable, less human? Just as a fragile calm began to settle, the scratching returned. Deliberate, unhurried, a dry, insistent whisper against the wall. He shot upright, pulse frantic. No more denial, no more self-deception. He had to see. He crossed the room one last time, the floorboards creaking under his weight. His hand, slick with sweat, trembled as it closed around the knob. He unlocked it, pushed. The hole was empty. A dark, unblinking eye in the wall, stripped bare. Air hitched in his lungs. The pounding in his chest became a physical pain. He stumbled back, pulling the door shut, fumbling with the lock again before retreating to the bed, wrapping his arms around himself as if to hold his fracturing composure together. The sensation of being watched was absolute now. a palpable pressure in the room. He felt hunted, cornered. He didn't know how they watched or why, only that they were there, patient, just beyond the thin barrier of plaster and peeling wallpaper. Sleep was impossible. He remained there, rigid on the edge of the bed, staring at the bathroom door until the first weak hint of dawn stained the edges of the grimy window pane. That gray light was a reprieve, a signal. He grabbed his bag, movement stiff with adrenaline and lack of sleep, and fled the room. No checkout, no word to the silent guardian of the night. He threw himself into his car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, and accelerated away, tires spitting gravel. The motel dwindled in the rearview mirror, a malignant shape receding into the landscape. Only miles later, with the sun fully risen, did his breathing begin to even out. But the feeling lingers, a cold spot on his soul, the certainty that in that room, the silent watcher remains, waiting for the next weary traveler, the next person to notice the small, perfect hole. And Elias knows, with a chilling conviction, that whatever waited on the other side of that wall is still there, patient as the dust, watching. That ancient farmhouse hunched against the horizon, a solitary ember against the swallowing dark of the tempest. Little did I fathom, rapping on its timbered door would be the act that irrevocably bound my future. Rain hammered my windscreen, a frantic liquid curtain, the wipers battled in vain. Through the deluge, the road ahead dissolved into aqueous obscurity. My knuckles were bleached bone white, fused to the steering wheel. Hours I'd driven, stitching my way across the map towards a promised new beginning, a different life. The storm, a sudden malevolent beast, had sprung from placid skies, twisting familiar countryside into a labyrinth of drenched asphalt and blinding sheets of water. Then, lightning ripped the sky, a momentary, brutal illumination. And there it lay, a colossal limb, torn from some unseen titan of the woods, sprawled directly across my path. Instinct slammed the brakes. Metal shrieked, tires lost purchase, hydroplaning on the slick surface. A gasp tore from my throat as I wrestled the wheel, the car pirouetting sickeningly before shuddering to a halt, mere inches from the splintered wood. Adrenaline sang a high, thin note in my veins. Too close. Far too close. Shifting into reverse, a prayer on my lips for retreat, the engine coughed, sputtered, and fell silent. A strangled "no" escaped me. Again and again, I twisted the key. Only the desolate click of a drained battery answered. A cold tendril of panic began its insidious climb. Stranded, utterly alone in the heart of a maelstrom, my chariot lifeless. My phone, clutched like a talisman, offered only the stark, mocking epitaph. No service. Another lightning flash, briefer this time, revealed a pinprick of light piercing the tree line. A dwelling, my sole refuge. Snatching my raincoat, a flimsy shield against the elements, I inhaled deeply and plunged into the churning downpour. The rain was glacial, instantly invasive, plastering clothes to skin. Mud sucked greedily at my shoes, each step a laborious squelch as I navigated the treacherous ground. The wind a banshee tearing at my hair, shoving me towards that distant, fragile luminescence. An eternity condensed into minutes brought me to a weathered picket fence. Beyond it stood the farmhouse, its windows casting squares of warm, inviting light onto the storm-lashed night. Relief, sharp and sudden, almost brought tears. I stumbled up the groaning porch steps, shivering, arms wrapped tight around myself, whispering, "Please, someone, anyone." The door groaned open on protesting hinges. A woman stood silhouetted against the interior light, elderly, her silver hair drawn back severely into a bun. A floral apron was tied neatly over a plain, dark dress. "Mercy, child," she breathed, her gaze sweeping over my sodden state. "Come away inside. Escape this dreadful night." Gratitude overwhelmed me as I crossed the threshold, instantly cocooned in warmth and the comforting aroma of baking yeast. "Thank you. Oh, thank you," I managed, teeth chattering uncontrollably. "My car, it died, just up the lane. I hoped perhaps your telephone." "But of course, dear," the woman murmured, securing the door against the raging storm. "I am Agnes, and this," she indicated an older man emerging from an adjoining room, wiping his large hands on a checkered cloth, "is my husband, Silas." "Evening," Silas rumbled, his voice deep, rough-edged but not unfriendly. "Wicked night for travel." I offered my name, Elara, and recounted the sorry tale of the fallen branch and the failed engine. While I spoke, Agnes fussed about, pressing a thick towel into my hands, guiding me towards a crackling hearth. "Afraid the storm's taken our lines down, miss," Silas stated, a note of apology in his tone. "But you're welcome to shelter here till sunrise. We can run you into town come morning, see about your vehicle." A flicker of hesitation. Strangers. An isolated house. But the alternative was the merciless storm. "That's incredibly generous," I said, forcing a grateful smile. "Thank you, truly." Agnes positively beamed. "No trouble, none at all, dearie. Now, let's find you something dry. I'm certain I've got a spare gown that'll do." She led me up a narrow staircase to a small chamber beneath the eaves. Faded floral patterns climbed the walls. A handmade quilt, intricate and colorful, lay folded upon the bed, radiating cozy invitation. From a heavy oak dresser, Agnes retrieved a flannel nightgown and a thick robe. "These ought to keep the chill out," she said, offering them. "You change now. There'll be hot soup waiting when you come down." Renewed thanks tumbled from my lips as she withdrew, closing the door softly behind her. Stripping off my drenched clothes, a wave of genuine appreciation washed over me. Such kindness felt like a relic from another time. Clad in the borrowed garments, soft and smelling faintly of lavender, I descended. The soup was thick, savory, chasing the cold from my bones. Agnes and Silas maintained a gentle stream of chatter, inquiries about my destination, my intended work. Everything felt so blessedly ordinary, profoundly safe. Yet, as the hours drew on, discordant notes began to mar the symphony of normalcy. The way Silas's gaze would sometimes fix on me, lingering when he believed my attention elsewhere. The slight rigidity in Agnes's smile, a pleasant mask that didn't quite align with the shrewdness in her eyes. And then, glimpsed as I returned from the washroom, sturdy-looking locks bolted to the outside of my guest room door. An involuntary shiver traced my spine. Dismiss it, I told myself. An old house, eccentricities. They were simply good Samaritans offering refuge. Wasn't this the heartwarming narrative one always hoped existed? Sleep, when I finally sought it in the quilt-laden bed, proved elusive. A small, insistent voice whispered caution. My phone remained useless, a dead weight, cut off, alone with these two in the vast, storm-shrouded emptiness. Every settling groan of the aged structure, every frantic gust rattle in the window panes sent jolts through my system. I drifted in and out of uneasy dreams, thin and fragmented. A distinct sound sliced through the nocturnal symphony of wind and rain. Footfalls, soft, deliberate, in the hallway. Then hushed voices right outside my door. I froze, straining my ears, holding my breath. Can't just keep her indefinitely, Agnes whispered, the words barely penetrating the thick wood. We'll manage, Silas's low rumble replied, same as always. The floorboards creaked as they moved away. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat surely audible through the door. What did they mean? Same as always? Barefoot, silent on the cool floorboards, I slipped from the bed. Escape. The imperative screamed in my mind. My hand closed around the doorknob, twisted, locked. A cold certainty washed over me, dousing the embers of gratitude. Of course, trapped. Panic surged, a suffocating wave I fought to suppress. Think. There must be another way. The window. I wrenched back the heavy curtains. My breath hitched. Iron bars, thick and unyielding, gridlocked the opening. This wasn't a rustic haven. It was a cage. Frantically, my eyes scanned the room. A weapon? Leverage? Anything? The space was benign, sterile, stripped bare of any potential aid. A key scraped in the lock. I went utterly still, suspended in terror. The door swung inward, revealing Agnes. Gone was the kindly grandmother facade. In its place, a chillingly placid, calculating expression that froze my marrow. Ah, awake are we? Her voice was light, horribly cheerful. Silas has prepared breakfast. You must be famished. I recoiled, stumbling back against the dresser. What is it you want? The question emerged thin, quavering despite my efforts. Agnes's smile stretched, unnatural, showing a fraction too much gum. Why, companionship, dear Alara. It does get frightfully dull out here, just the two of us. We find we need younger spirits to brighten the place. You're mad, I whispered, trembling visibly now. Let me leave, please. Tut, tut, she chided softly. Such language is hardly fitting for our newest family member. Now come along. Breakfast awaits. She reached for my arm. Instinct took over. I shoved her hard. She staggered back with a sharp cry of surprise, colliding with the wall. I didn't hesitate. I bolted, out the door, down the hallway, bare feet pounding a desperate rhythm on the wooden stairs. Shouts erupted behind me, heavy footfalls in pursuit. The front door. Freedom beckoned, mere feet away. My hand closed on the handle, yanked. Immovable, locked, naturally. Then rough hands clamped onto me from behind, pinioning my arms. A scream ripped from my throat as I kicked, thrashed, fought with the primal fury of a cornered animal. But Silas was immensely strong, his grip like iron shackles. "Well, now, that wasn't neighborly," he growled, his breath hot against my ear. "After we took you in." Agnes appeared at the foot of the stairs, rubbing her shoulder, her eyes glinting with malice. "She requires a lesson in gratitude, Silas. Take her below." "No!" I shrieked, renewing my struggles with desperate strength. "Help! Please, somebody help me!" Only the wind answered, its mournful howl swallowing my pleas whole. Silas began dragging me towards a door recessed beneath the staircase, one I hadn't registered before. It opened onto steep, narrow steps descending into absolute blackness. From that Stygian depth, faint sounds drifted up, whimpers, stifled sobs. Dear God, I wasn't the first. How many others had mistaken this place for sanctuary? As Silas forced me downwards, step by agonizing step, the full, crushing weight of my predicament descended. This wasn't merely a terrifying night. It was the precipice of an unending nightmare. The basement door slammed shut above, plunging me into suffocating darkness, sealing my fate. My last coherent thought echoed the frantic rhythm of my captured heart. I should have stayed in the car. A singular hush descends upon the woods as twilight bleeds the color from the world. A stillness so profound it feels less like peace and more like the forest holding its breath, waiting. It's the kind of quiet that magnifies your solitude, stripping away any illusion of welcome, leaving you exposed. That peculiar silence wrapped around me, cold and close, as I huddled by the campfire, mesmerized by the dance of orange tongues against the encroaching dark. Lingering this late hadn't been the plan. The trail, deceptive in its familiarity, had unspooled slower than anticipated. Now, miles separating me from my vehicle, the fire and the churning of my own thoughts were my sole companions as the last light evaporated from the bruised sky. It had seemed a restorative notion, this solo pilgrimage into the wilderness, an attempt to scour clean the residue of a demanding week. The path chosen was well trodden by my own boots, a serpentine route through dense timber culminating in a secluded clearing beside a murmuring stream. I knew this sanctuary, yet always departed before the sun relinquished its hold entirely. Something intangible clung to the place after dark, a subtle wrongness I could never articulate, always dismissed as the standard apprehension of isolation. Tonight, however, with shadows stretching like grasping fingers from the tree line, that dismissal felt flimsy, inadequate. The fire whispered its secrets, spitting embers that briefly illuminated the immense, dark sentinels surrounding the clearing. Branches overhead sketched slow, deliberate patterns against the deepening indigo, a portrait of serenity, objectively, yet a familiar tremor of disquiet traced its icy path up my spine. A deep inhalation, an attempt to dispel the gathering dread. Nerves, surely. Just the predictable consequence of being utterly alone, deep within the untamed woods, the only significant change being the absence of the sun. The flames offered warmth. The night air carried a crisp coolness. I was secure. Wasn't I? Then came the sound, subtle yet distinct beneath the fire's gentle crackle. A delicate rustling, originating just beyond the ring of light. Faint, hesitant, yet undeniably there. Something stirring within the undergrowth. I went rigid, my pulse hammering against my ribs, straining to listen. The noise was measured, unhurried, suggestive of stealthy approach. My hand closed around the flashlight in my pack, its beam slicing futilely into the blackness between the trees. Nothing but bark and shifting leaves met the light. A ragged exhale escaped me, though my heart refused to slow. An animal, perhaps? A deer? A curious fox drawn by the flames? Logically, yes, but logic offered little comfort against the rising certainty that I was no longer the clearing's sole occupant. Pushing myself upright, the flashlight's beam wavered slightly in my grip as I swept it along the perimeter of the firelight. The rustling had ceased, replaced by that thick, expectant silence, yet the unease remained, settling upon my shoulders like a sodden cloak. The impulse to gather my things and flee warred with the stark terror of navigating the lightless trail back to the car. Staying felt perilous, but moving seemed worse. Resigned, I sank back beside the fire, forcing myself toward a semblance of calm. The sound was gone. The night was still. Paranoia, I told myself, feeding on isolation. Yet, even as I sought solace in the fire's hypnotic glow, the sensation of being observed prickled insistently at the back of my neck. And then, flickering at the edge of my vision, a presence, a shape, standing where the firelight frayed against the absolute dark, partially obscured by the bole of an ancient oak. My breath hitched. My heart vaulted into my throat. I wrenched the flashlight toward it, but the instant the beam illuminated the space, it was empty. Nothing. I scrambled to my feet again, the light trembling violently now. "Hello?" The word burst out, louder than intended, swallowed by the vastness. "Is anyone there?" Only the fire's soft consumption answered, the silence amplifying, becoming heavier. I stood frozen, heart battering my ribs, anticipating something. A reply, a movement, anything. But the figure did not return. The trees stood impassive, the shadows deep and undisturbed. Had I truly seen it? The form, the subtle shift, it felt too concrete for mere phantoms born of flickering light and fear. Yet doubt gnawed. Perhaps the solitude was indeed fracturing my perception, conjuring specters from the gloom. Deep within, however, a colder certainty persisted. Something, someone, had been standing at the threshold of the lot, watching. Lowering myself cautiously back to the ground, my nerves felt frayed, raw. Every forest noise now seemed amplified, intimate, menacing. The fire's crackle echoed unnaturally. The sigh of wind through the pines sounded like a whispered threat. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach as my mind replayed the fleeting image. The decision solidified. Wait only until the flames began to wane, then seize my pack and make for the car. A trek through the Stygian woods suddenly seemed preferable to remaining a stationary target in this unsettling clearing. Before I could act, the rustling resumed. Louder this time, sharper, emanating from the precise location where the shape had materialized. I surged to my feet, flashlight aimed like a weapon. "Who's there?" My voice strained, attempting firmness. Silence answered, but not emptiness, because I saw it again. Closer now, just beyond the furthest reach of the firelight. Tall, disturbingly so, its silhouette long-limbed and ill-defined against the black canvas of the woods. Details remained elusive, lost in shadow. Yet I felt its gaze fixed upon me. an intense, unseen scrutiny from the darkness. My lungs seized. I stared, transfixed by a primal fear that rooted me to the spot. It offered no movement, no sound, simply existed, an unnerving sentinel in the night. Then, with an abruptness that was somehow worse than sudden motion, it receded. It stepped back, melting into the trees, vanishing into the profound blackness without a whisper, without disturbing a single leaf. This time, there was no hesitation. I grabbed my pack, slinging it haphazardly onto my back while simultaneously dousing the embers with the dregs of my water bottle. Hands shaking uncontrollably, heart a frantic drum against my ribs, I snatched my remaining gear and plunged toward the trail's entrance. No backward glances. I didn't want confirmation that the silent watcher lingered in the shadows. Escape was the only imperative echoing in my skull. The path was a treacherous ribbon twisting through suffocating darkness, the trees pressing close on either side. My flashlight, its power dwindling, threw spastic arcs of weak light that seemed only to deepen the surrounding gloom. Every snapped twig, every rustle of unseen life sent jolts of adrenaline through me, my imagination populating the woods behind me with the pursuing tall figure. I didn't pause, didn't dare rest, driven onward by sheer terror until, through the dense trunks ahead, I perceived the faint, blessed gleam of my car's reflectors. A wave of relief so potent it left me weak-kneed washed over me as I stumbled from the tree line, legs quivering from exertion and fright. My pack landed unceremoniously in the back seat as I scrambled behind the wheel, turned the key, and accelerated out of the small lot, eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead. What inhabited the woods with me that night remains an enigma. Human, animal, or some entity falling outside those categories I cannot say, but the encounter imparted one indelible piece of knowledge. I will never tread that path again. Some corners of the wild, I now understand, are best left undisturbed. And sometimes the deep silence of the forest is far from empty. I surfaced into wakefulness slick with cold perspiration, my heart hammering like a trapped bird against the cage of my ribs. That first night, seeing the presence in the dark folds of sleep, I dismissed it. A phantom born of overwork, perhaps. But its nightly return, relentless and identical, gnawed away at that easy denial. Something was profoundly amiss. Beyond fear, a deeper exhaustion took root, a weariness sleep refused to mend. Thus it began. My existence is a solitary one, housed in a modest structure skirting the city's sprawl. Visitors are rare. My days unfold in predictable rhythm. I wrestle with machinery in a repair shop until dusk, return home, consume a simple meal, and dull my thoughts with flickering screens before succumbing to sleep. Nothing in this quiet life foreshadowed the arrival of the shadow, the initial dream. I stood within a lightless passage. Its walls wept moisture, ancient stone slick and cold as a crypt's embrace. My own breath emerged in ragged, visible puffs. A chill permeated the air, clinging to my skin. Yet the darkness ahead remained absolute until a form detached itself from the deeper gloom at the corridor's terminus. Swathed in a dark mantle, hood drawn low to obscure its features, it drifted. No footfall, no rustle of fabric disturbed the silence, only a fluid, unnerving glide across the unseen floor. A shout gathered in my throat, a strangled, voiceless thing. The passage felt glacial, constricting. Then it extended a hand toward me, the fingers impossibly long, pale as bone. Consciousness snapped back violently, leaving me gasping in my bed. Morning revealed the meager hours sleep had granted. Stiffness locked my limbs, my eyes burned with grit. Just a nightmare, I insisted, perhaps spawned by some half-remembered documentary. I forced myself through the day's motions. The second night, the dreamscape reformed. The damp passage materialized, its stale air heavy, pressing. This time the figure stood closer, close enough for a fleeting glimpse beneath the hood. Twin voids where eyes should be, skin stretched taut and papery over sharp bone. It performed a slow, deliberate gesture near my chest, like scooping unseen motes from the air. My heart convulsed, a frantic pounding that jolted me awake into a fit of coughing. My throat raw, breath hitched for terrifying seconds. I threw off the covers, pacing the confines of my bedroom. A dull throb pulsed behind my eyes, accompanied by a peculiar pressure within my chest. The ache of breath held too long. In the bathroom mirror, fluorescent light exposed the dark smudges beneath my eyes, my hair plastered damply to my forehead. Cold water did little to quell the clamminess of my skin or the tremor in my hands. Ignore it, I commanded myself. Stress, only stress. I retreated to bed, stealing a few more hours of troubled, shallow sleep. By week's end, the pretense of normalcy shattered. The dream repeated with chilling fidelity, the figure's presence intensifying each night. I woke progressively more depleted, vitality leached away while I slept. One morning, consciousness nearly deserted me mid-shower. Another day found me nodding off behind the wheel during my lunch break. Colleagues remarked on my pallor, my distracted air. Insomnia, I mumbled, a half-truth that skirted the terrifying core of the nightly visitations. Admitting fear of a dream-bound entity felt like confessing madness. Who readily speaks of terrors that only bloom when eyes are closed? Then came the pouches. The first materialized near the front door, a small sachet of rough-spun sable cloth cinched with a thin, dark cord. Picking it up sent a jolt of unnatural coldness into my palm, like grasping solid frost, though the fabric itself was dry. As I loosened the drawstring, a puff of frigid air struck my face, carrying on it the ghost of a whisper, a single, rasping syllable, indistinct yet deeply unsettling. The hairs on my nape prickled. I dropped the pouch. It skittered under a nearby chair. Heart thudding, I forced my breathing to slow before retrieving it cautiously with a towel. It ended up in a box shoved deep into the closet, an object I couldn't bear to look at, a mystery deferred. The following day, another rested on my kitchen counter. Identical in size and fabric, radiating the same profound chill. Touching it sent my pulse skittering. Heat flared in my cheeks, my stomach twisted into knots. Logic offered no solace. My doors and windows were always secured. No one possessed a key. These appearances defied explanation, yet felt deliberate, staged for my discovery. Subtle variations marked each new arrival. One bore a faint, faded sigil like 3 intersecting lines. Another showed a darker stain near its base. Every time I dared untie the cord, the icy exhalation rushed out, accompanied by that fleeting, sibilant whisper. Never more than a breath, a second or two of sound. Concurrently, the nocturnal landscape shifted. The corridor bled into a vast, echoing chamber. Within this space, the figure now stood, seemingly gathering faint motes of light from the air around it. My own chest felt strangely hollow with each inhalation. In the dream's distorted reality, I sometimes glimpsed my reflection hovering behind the figure, eyes sunken, face gaunt. When those skeletal fingers reached, I would inevitably wrench myself awake, drenched, heart echoing in my ears. Sheets clung damply. My head felt thick, leaden, as if sleep had offered no respite for days. Muscles screamed, thoughts crawled. Answers became imperative. I trawled the digital depths, seeking correlations, mysterious figures in dreams, pouches exuding cold, anything mirroring my ordeal. Most results led to fiction, mythology, dismissible tales. Hours dissolved into scrolling through obscure forums, reading accounts of shadow entities, oniroi, ancient predatory spirits. Then, buried within a thread on obscure folklore, I encountered a reference: the Collector of Sighs. A sparse entry detailed an old belief in a darkened presence that fed on human despair, traversing unseen pathways to infiltrate dreams and harvest fear, anxiety, sorrow. The more potent the host's distress, the stronger the entity's anchor. The post was brief, the subsequent comments unenlightening, yet the name resonated with a chilling finality: the Collector of Sighs. I tried to dismiss it, but the parallels accumulated over the following days. The forum mentioned small cloth talismans used by this entity to store distilled hopelessness, pouches invariably cold, releasing trapped fear upon being opened. A tightness seized my chest as I read. The description felt too precise for coincidence. Closing the laptop, a cold sweat beaded on my brow. My hands shook. Catching my breath felt like surfacing after a desperate plunge. Denying the connection became impossible, yet each night the dream persisted. I witnessed the figure glean something shimmering from the air, reaching into the dream space occupied by my chest to draw out a thin, ephemeral vapor. My lungs seized. My throat burned. Awakening was always violent, exhausting. Energy drinks became my crutch, fueling me through workdays. I lashed out at my supervisor for expressing concern. A permanent tension settled in my shoulders. My back throbbed constantly. More pouches manifested, tucked beneath the bed frame, resting by the bathroom sink, nestled beside the living room sofa. Each offered the familiar shock of cold, the whispered exhalation upon opening, sometimes a wheeze, sometimes a sharp gasp. It always lasted mere moments, yet each instant sent adrenaline coursing through me. I continued gathering them, adding them to the growing collection in the closet's cardboard box, paralyzed by uncertainty. One evening, sleep claimed me on the couch. The vast chamber reappeared, its walls stained with dark, indeterminate patterns. The figure waited, but this time it turned its hooded head, fixing its unseen gaze directly upon me. A low, sibilant hiss slithered through the dream air. My vision swam, strength fled my legs, dropping me to my knees on the cold, dreamstone floor. As it extended a hand, a distinct pulling sensation emanated from my chest, as if unseen threads tugged at my very lungs. Tears blurred my sight. My arms trembled uncontrollably. With a wrenching physical effort, I threw myself sideways, forcing wakefulness. I found myself sprawled on the living room floor, cheek pressed against the rough carpet fibers, gasping, sweat cooling rapidly on my temple. The need to confide became overwhelming, yet who would lend credence to such a tale? Friends here are few, family distant. A doctor? Excuse me, I believe a dream entity is siphoning my vitality. Prescriptions or referrals seemed a likely, inadequate outcome. So, my solitary research intensified. I devoured texts on spirit lore, oniric parasites, methods of severance, rituals, chants, prayers surfaced, alongside suggestions to starve the entity by focusing on positivity, by denying it the sustenance of fear. But the fear was visceral, the exhaustion undeniable. I attempted mental barricades before sleep. Loud music, mindless videos, distracting chores. Yet, the moment my eyelids grew heavy, thoughts inevitably drifted to the shadowed presence. Dread coiled in my stomach at the prospect of its reappearance. Even during waking hours, flashes of the dream ambushed me. Sitting at my desk, my hands might suddenly tremble, fumbling objects. The ache in my chest persisted, a hollow sensation directly beneath my sternum. Then a pattern emerged. The pouches didn't appear randomly. Their manifestation seemed linked to periods of heightened anxiety. A particularly stressful day at work would yield a new sachet discovered upon my return home. It felt sickeningly reciprocal. My distress nourished it, and it harvested fragments of that dread into these cold tokens, and the whispers released upon opening them. I began to recognize the sound, my own sharp, panicked intakes of breath, captured echoes from the dream. My knots devolved further. I fought sleep, forcing myself through repetitive television shows until my eyes burned and thoughts blurred into incoherence. Inevitably, around 3 a.m, oblivion would claim me, wherever I happened to be. Awakening, whether on the couch or slumped at the kitchen table, brought the same profound fatigue, the sensation of having labored, not rested. My heart pounded each morning as I struggled upright, mouth parched, limbs weighted. I took to murmuring reassurances to myself, attempting to cultivate a defensive posture. It isn't real. It cannot harm me if I withhold my fear. The words felt empty, brittle. The next descent into sleep brought the inevitable passage, the chamber, the waiting figure. Its presence felt increasingly substantial, possessing weight, solidity. It would raise one of the sable pouches, decanting a faint vapor into it, vapor that seemed to drift directly from my own chest. My breath hitched reflexively with each transfer. I'd wake choking, gasping. In desperation, I resolved to discard the pouches. Gathering the entire collection from the closet box, I sealed them in a heavy refuse sack and drove to a distant, anonymous dumpster. I hurled the bag inside, slammed the heavy lid shut, and drove away quickly, a fragile surge of relief washing over me. That night, I clung to the hope of an empty dreamscape, but the vision returned, relentless, and in the morning, 2 new pouches lay starkly upon my bedside table. A cry of pure frustration escaped me. I kicked the bed frame, pacing wildly, breath coming in ragged bursts. My legs felt unsteady, hands icy, a fine tremor vibrating deep within my chest. The truth struck with brutal clarity. My own dread was the key, the invitation. Each surge of anxiety widened the aperture through which it reached. The collector of sighs wasn't merely a name. It was a literal description. It thrived on my gasps, my fearful exhalations, my sighs of encroaching despair. Each pouch, a vessel for those stolen moments of panic. Understanding sparked a shift in strategy. Not hope, not positivity, but simple physical control. I resolved not to panic when faced with the figure. It was an arduous discipline practiced during daylight hours. Slow, measured breathing, inhale calm, exhale the rising panic. At night, feeling the familiar tendrils of the dream closing in, I focused on maintaining that steady rhythm, consciously unclenching my jaw, keeping my hands loose. The corridor still materialized, the damp walls, the hovering figure. When the cold hand reached, I focused solely on the slow cadence of my breath. My heart hammered, yes, but I resisted the urge to gasp or flinch. The figure drifted closer, yet I met its unseen gaze steadily. Over several nights, a subtle shift occurred. The exhaustion upon waking lessened, though it remained. The pouches ceased their proliferation. Only 2 or 3 more appeared, then none. My body remained taut with tension, but each morning felt incrementally less depleted. In the dream, the passage remained, but the figure no longer held center stage. Sometimes it lingered only at the periphery, a fleeting shadow in the corner of my awareness. The chill persisted when it moved, but my breath remained even. My chest felt tight, constricted, but the burning sensation subsided. Freedom remains elusive. Its presence lingers, an unsettling awareness, particularly in the deep hours of the night. Occasionally, a faint whisper seems to emanate from the closet where the box once resided. A dark shape flickers at the edge of my vision sometimes while I stand at the bathroom sink. My heart still leaps at sudden noises, but I fight to keep panic from cresting. The absence of new pouches for several days feels like a victory, however fragile. I don't pretend comprehension of this thing, but I know yielding to terror only strengthens its hold. My sole recourse is composure. Calm is a facade I struggle to maintain. Flickering lights make me jump. A flashlight resides permanently by my bed. Sleeping with the door closed is now unthinkable. Yet I endure. I persist. My hope, thin but present, is that by denying the collector of sighs its sustenance, I might slowly starve it, push it back into whatever abyss spawned it. My body aches with chronic sleep debt, vision blurs intermittently, and inexplicable chills still trace paths across my skin late at night. But I refuse to surrender. Whether this presence will ever fully recede, or if this vigilance is now my permanent state, remains unknown. All I can control are my own reactions, the steady rhythm of my breath. That is where I stand now, locked in a nightly battle against the thing that feeds on my fear, a struggle renewed each time I close my eyes. That single crimson eye, the security camera's steady blink, marked time in the cavernous lobby. A familiar pulse across innumerable nights, yet tonight it throbbed, a tiny, insistent star mirroring the frantic cadence in my own chest. The air itself felt wrong, dense as velvet, laced with the metallic tang of apprehension. My predictable vigil at Meridian Spire was fraying at the edges, threatening to unravel into something unforeseen, something that would twist my understanding of this place, its people, and the fragile substance of reality itself. My name is Elias. For 3 years, the graveyard shift has been my domain within these glass and steel cliffs. By day, Meridian Spire gleams, a monument to commerce. By night, it morphs, a necropolis of echoing hallways and profound shadows. Wakefulness is usually the prime adversary. Not tonight. Tonight, the quiet shattered. A sudden, piercing shriek from the desk phone jolted me from my reverie. I snatched the receiver, the plastic cool against my ear, expecting the usual drone of the overnight supervisor or perhaps a cleaner reporting a spill. "Security console, Elias speaking," I offered, swallowing a yawn. Silence answered, stretched thin, then fractured by a woman's voice, a mere thread of sound. "Please, you must help. I'm caught." Instinct straightened my spine. Alertness flooded me. "Ma'am, your location? Where precisely are you?" "Unknown," she breathed, her voice laced with tremors. "Darkness surrounds me. No windows. Nothing. Find me before they return." My thoughts scrambled. A cruel jest? An elaborate corporate drill? Yet the raw terror color in her whisper felt undeniably authentic. "All right, remain calm," I urged, striving for a composure I didn't feel. "I will assist you. Describe anything, any sensation, any sound." "Cold," she whispered back, and a low thrumming, like deep engines. The sub-levels. Instantly, I knew. The building's mechanical heart resided there. But access and imprisonment? By whom? "I'm en route," I assured her. "Keep the line open if possible." Flashlight secured, radio clipped to my belt, I paused. Procedure dictated contacting the authorities, awaiting reinforcement. A deeper instinct screamed urgency, overriding protocol. Action, immediate and solitary, was required. The elevator's descent felt glacial, each floor number lighting up like a slow-motion countdown. As the doors finally sighed open, a wave of frigid air washed over me, carrying the resonant hum of hidden machinery. My flashlight carved an arc through the gloom, its beam skittering across insulated pipes and junction boxes lining the concrete passage. "Hello?" My voice seemed small, swallowed by the vastness. "Is anyone present?" Silence answered, profound and heavy. I pressed deeper into the subterranean labyrinth, my boot falls echoing unnervingly. A growing disquiet settled upon me, a sense that the narrative was skewed, incomplete. And then I saw it, nestled behind skeletal filing cabinets in a forgotten alcove, a door utterly unfamiliar. Solid steel, featureless on this side save for a numeric keypad. Holding my breath, I pressed my ear against the cold metal. Faintly, unmistakably, the sound of weeping reached me from the other side. "Hello?" I called, louder this time. "Are you inside? I'm here to offer aid." The crying ceased instantly. "Please," the woman's voice returned, muffled but clear. "Release me from this place." I studied the keypad. 4 digits. The standard building access code, 9091, yielded nothing. I cycled through dates, sequential numbers, anything remotely plausible. Futility mounted, a bitter taste in my mouth. So near, yet barred by this obstinate metal slab. Force was futile. The steel looked capable of shattering bone before yielding. Footsteps echoed abruptly behind me. I spun, flashlight beam finding a known face, Marcus, another sentinel of the night shift. "Elias, what brings you down to the bowels?" His expression was one of simple puzzlement. Rapidly, I relayed the desperate call, the hidden door, the voice within. With each word, Marcus's brow furrowed deeper, concern morphing into something else. "Elias," he began, his tone measured, cautious, "there are no phone lines routed to the sublevels, and that particular door, it's always been present. Accesses the old civil defense shelter, been sealed for decades." An icy tendril traced its way down my spine. "But I heard her," I insisted, conviction warring with rising doubt. "She is in there, now." Marcus regarded me with an expression bordering on pity. "Come now, man, let's return topside. You look like you could use some air." But the certainty wouldn't release its grip. I knew what I had experienced. As Marcus turned, I caught his arm. "Just help me attempt entry. Please. If it's empty, I'll concede, I swear." He exhaled, a long-suffering sound, but acquiesced. "Fine, but I'm telling you, it's locked down tighter than a drum. Predates both our tenures here." He approached the keypad, fingers tapping out a sequence. To my utter astonishment, a distinct click resonated from the lock mechanism. "How did you—" I started, bewildered. Marcus interrupted, his voice strained. "Elias, I strongly advise we reconsider." But I was already heaving the door inward. Ancient hinges groaned, stiff with long disuse. As the portal swung open, my flashlight beam pierced the space beyond. Empty, utterly vacant. Bare concrete, dust-shrouded remnants of forgotten furniture. No trapped woman, no evidence of recent occupation. I stood frozen, reeling. Had I conjured the entire episode? Was my sanity fracturing? Then my gaze fell upon the floor. The thick layer of dust wasn't undisturbed. Footprints. Clear, recent prints leading deeper into the shelter's recesses. "Marcus," I whispered, the sound barely escaping my lips. "Observe this." I turned. Marcus was no longer there. In his stead stood a figure entirely unknown, immaculate in a tailored black suit, his face impassive. Before comprehension could dawn, before a single muscle could twitch in reaction, he lifted a hand. A blinding flare erupted, swallowing my vision, and then only oblivion. Consciousness returned abruptly. I was slumped at my desk in the lobby. Morning light streamed through the towering windows, painting long stripes across the polished floor. A dull throbbing pulsed behind my eyes, accompanied by the frustrating sense of something vital grasped and lost just beyond memory's reach. As I numbly gathered my belongings, preparing for departure, my supervisor appeared, radiating morning cheerfulness. "Morning, Elias," he greeted brightly. "Quiet night? Anything noteworthy for the log?" My mouth opened, then closed. Fragments flickered at the periphery of my mind. A desperate plea over the phone, the chill of the basement, an unyielding steel door. Yet it all felt nebulous, dreamlike. "No," I managed finally. "Uneventful." He nodded, seemingly content, and moved on. But as I walked towards the main entrance, a flicker on the security monitor snagged my attention, arresting my movement, chilling my blood. The display showed a feed from the sublevels, and there, tucked away in a dim corner, starkly visible, was a steel door I had never consciously registered before today. The ensuing weeks became a blurred cycle of furtive investigation and inexplicable lapses. Each time I felt close to understanding, near to uncovering some tangible clue, I would find myself abruptly back at my console, hours unaccounted for, memories wiped clean like a slate. My colleagues maintained a facade of normalcy, yet occasionally I'd intercept their gazes, watchful, wary. Meridian Spire, I now understand, is far more than steel and glass. It is a vessel for secrets, profound and perhaps terrible. And the architects of this secrecy possess the means to sculpt memory, to erase inconvenient truths, perhaps even people. I commit these words to paper now, hastily, while the recollection holds, because a chilling certainty grows within me. Soon, I too might become a missing piece, an erased memory. If this account finds you, do not dismiss it as I almost dismissed that desperate voice. Something festers here, something monstrous cloaked in the mundane. Remember the insistent crimson light. Remember the sealed door in the depths, and trust no one within these walls. Above all, perhaps, do not even trust the certainty of your own mind. It began, subtly, with the bathroom mirror a week past. A fleeting assessment during the morning ritual, readying myself for the day outside. My own face regarded me, etched with weariness, the shadow of overnight stubble clinging to my jaw. Nothing amiss, initially. Then a flicker, a fractional hesitation in the glass. My hand lifted, its mirrored counterpart lagged, a mere heartbeat behind, yet enough to send a cold knot twisting low in my gut. Blinking, rubbing tired eyes, I tried to assign blame to the lingering grip of sleep. I turned from the glass, retreated to the kitchen, the simple act of placing bread in the toaster suffused with an inexplicable disquiet. The day unfolded with mundane normalcy until the late return, the key turning in the lock, the apartment flooding with artificial light. Familiar territory, nothing overtly changed. Yet, drawn back to the bathroom, the need to cleanse the city grime from my face became secondary to the urge to test the glass again. I leaned in, searching my reflection. For a moment, synchronicity held. Then, my right arm, mirrored, seemed to drag, a ghost of latency disrupting the image. My heart kicked against my ribs. A constricting tension tightened my scalp. I stood, locked in place, breathing deliberately through my nose before retreating, snapping off the light and collapsing onto the sofa's familiar embrace. Sleep offered no refuge that night. Each time my eyelids fell, the fractured reflection played behind them, a persistent echo of movement trailing my own. Around the stroke of midnight, thirst propelled me from bed. Padding toward the kitchen, I glimpsed my form in the darkened window pane above the sink. The room's ambient gloom rendered only a faint outline, yet behind it, distinctly, chillingly, stood a second silhouette, taller, blurred, its gaze seemingly fixed on the back of my skull. Air hitched in my throat. I whirled, knuckles white against the cool countertop. Emptiness greeted me. A shiver traced icy paths down my arms, the fine hairs on my nape prickling upright. I backed away from the window's deceptive surface. Sleep remained elusive for the duration of the night. Morning light brought a forced attempt at denial, a resolution to ignore the burgeoning wrongness. The shower was taken with averted eyes, the bathroom mirror studiously avoided. A tightness persisted in my chest, a constant urge to clear a non-existent obstruction from my throat. Dressing became an exercise in avoiding reflective surfaces. Yet, traversing the hallway, a small ornamental mirror snagged my peripheral vision. A shape, lurking just behind my shoulder, gone the instant I turned my head fully towards it. My pulse surged anew. I propelled myself forward, attributing the phantom to fatigue, to an overactive imagination. The office, with its relative scarcity of mirrors, offered a temporary reprieve. My focus narrowed to the computer screen, a mantra of self-reassurance playing on repeat. Paranoid, just paranoid. Lunchtime mandated a visit to the restroom, a confrontation I couldn't entirely evade. The long mirror above the sinks loomed. My reflection appeared faithful, unremarkable until I bent to wash my hands. Then a whisper, insidious and intimate, breathed my name directly beside my ear. My heart hammered violently. I froze, hands suspended beneath the running faucet. The sound of water, a sudden roaring intrusion. My gaze remained fixed on the porcelain basin, terror rooting me, forbidding me to look up. The throb of my own pulse echoed in my temples. With monumental effort, I twisted the tap shut, forced my head upward. Only my own reflection stared back, face ashen, eyes wide with fright. I snatched paper towels, dried my hands with trembling haste, and fled. The afternoon dissolved into a haze of unfocused tasks. A restless energy vibrated in my legs. My mouth felt perpetually dry. I lingered at my desk, delaying the inevitable return home. The bus journey stretched into an eternity, my gaze resolutely fixed on the gritty floor, avoiding the passing city reflected in the wide windows. Disembarking, I bypassed the elevator with its mirrored panels, opting for the echoing stairwell. Inside my apartment, the click of the deadbolt offered scant comfort. I stood immobile for several heartbeats, the familiar chest constriction returning, before methodically illuminating every corner of the space. Settling onto the couch, I stared into the blank television screen opposite. Its dark glass offered a muted reflection of the room, and with it, the returning sense of not being alone. A low murmur brushed my left ear, my name drawn out, languid. I jolted upright, the remote nearly slipping from my grasp. A frantic scan revealed nothing. My breath came in ragged gasps, hands shaking uncontrollably, throat seizing. Stumbling towards the TV, I flicked it on, seeking refuge in the meaningless chatter of scrolling channels. Dinner was a perfunctory affair. Noodles, scraps of chicken salvaged from the refrigerator, consumed standing in the kitchen, eyes deliberately kept from the window. Appetite had fled, yet I forced down mouthfuls. While washing the plate, the curved surface of the stainless steel faucet captured my distorted image. For a disorienting second, my face seemed recessed, retreating into shadow, impossibly distant. A hard blink, and normalcy snapped back. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm. Drying my hands, I retreated once more to the living room's relative safety. My phone became a focus, scrolling aimlessly through messages, yet my thoughts inevitably circled back to the lagging image in the glass. A mental inventory of my apartment's reflective surfaces formed. The television, a picture frame behind glossy glass, the microwave door, the hallway panel, and the primary offender in the bathroom. Each felt poised, waiting to betray me. Decision hardened into action. A towel was procured, draped decisively over the bathroom mirror. A spare sheet followed, smothering the larger mirror in the hall. A sliver of calm settled, fragile and momentary. Early bed seemed the only recourse. I left every light blazing, an unnatural brightness that felt necessary against the encroaching dark. Fully clothed, I slid beneath the covers, staring fixedly at the ceiling. The apartment settled into its nocturnal symphony, creaking floorboards, humming pipes. My breathing remained shallow, my heart refusing to quiet its frantic beat. An hour passed, perhaps more, before exhaustion dragged me into a fitful, uneasy slumber. I surfaced abruptly in the dead of night, roused by a cold, prickling awareness on my right arm. The lights glared, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating the room with sterile intensity. My eyes burned as I blinked against the brightness. Attempting to shift to find a more comfortable position, I heard it again. My name, a sibilant hiss, impossibly close. The vice around my chest tightened. A swift, panicked survey of the room confirmed my solitude. I pushed myself upright, legs unsteady, head throbbing with a dull ache. The thought of fleeing, of seeking anonymity in a hotel, flickered and died. The hour was late, the efficacy uncertain. Morning arrived, and with it, the practical need for action. Phone in hand, I navigated the automated menus to schedule an appointment. Citing severe anxiety, the shame of voicing the true nature of my distress too profound. A slot was available at week's end. Days stretched before me, filled with this invisible siege. Leaving the apartment felt like entering a gauntlet. I kept my gaze fastened to the pavement, navigating the sidewalk by feel, narrowly avoiding a collision with a startled pedestrian. Shop windows slid past, their reflections unseen, sweat gathering beneath my clothes despite the cool air. At work, the urge to confide, to share the burden, warred with the fear of dismissal, of being labeled unstable. I sat anchored to my desk, a rapid tattoo drumming from my foot. The restroom visit was a tactical maneuver. Utilize the stall, wash hands quickly in the corner sink, eyes fixed downward. I strained my ears for whispers, hearing only the familiar fluorescent hum, the squeak of distant shoes on tile. Returning to my desk, my supervisor inquired about my well-being. "Just tired," I mumbled, offering no further explanation despite his concerned gaze. He advised rest. I nodded, trapped in my silent ordeal. The day concluded, depositing me back at my apartment threshold, nerves frayed raw. The reassuring click of the lock, the sight of the covered mirrors, the pervasive electric glow, small comforts against the mounting dread. Fetching water from the fridge, my gaze inadvertently fell upon the microwave's dark glass door. My reflection stood there, starkly clear, and behind it, the unmistakable outline of the shape. Larger now, closer, its presence pressing near my shoulders. A gasp tore from my lungs as I spun around. Nothing, only empty air. Pressing the heels of my hands against my eyes, fighting a wave of dizziness, I gripped the counter for support, forcing measured breaths against the rising panic. running, screaming into the night felt terrifyingly plausible. Retreating to the living room, I sought distraction in the television's flickering images, flipping channels for hours, absorbing nothing. Around 10, silence felt preferable. I switched it off. The darkened screen became another mirror. My own face stared back, seemingly normal, but behind it, the umbral form solidified. I leaned closer, compelled. The shape seemed to incline its head, a gesture of slow, deliberate scrutiny. My entire body locked rigid. Scrambling to my feet, I whirled again. The room remained empty. Turning back, the screen was blank. The shape vanished. My heart hammered against my ribs with painful intensity, a pulse throbbing visibly in my neck. Passivity was no longer an option. Duct tape, unearthed from a cluttered drawer, became my weapon. I began systematically obliterating every reflective surface. The television screen, the microwave door, the glass of picture frames, even the small gleam of metal on the kitchen faucet. A final check confirmed the towels still shrouded the mirrors. When I finished, the apartment looked absurd, bandaged and wounded, yet a measure of relief washed over me. The whispers persisted, intermittent susurrations of my name, quiet and drawn out. I fought back with music, headphones clamped tight, drowning the insidious sounds. Food was consumed mechanically. Exhaustion warred with hypervigilance as I remained on the couch, too afraid to sleep properly. My body ached with sustained tension, neck stiff, shoulders knotted, knuckles cracked compulsively, legs jittered. Even my phone, its screen dark, held a faint reflective quality. I turned it on, brightness cranked to maximum, banishing the black mirror. Eventually, oblivion claimed me there, slumped amongst the cushions. Dawn filtered through the windows, yet another reflective surface I dared not scrutinize. Grabbing my jacket, I fled the apartment's suffocating confines. Walking aimlessly, eyes downcast, I navigated the familiar block. Storefronts passed, their glass panes ignored until habit betrayed me. A glance, involuntary, into one wide window. My reflection stood captured, and behind it, stark in the morning light, the shadowy figure loomed. My stomach revolted. I staggered backward, nearly losing my footing. A passerby's concerned query, "Are you all right?" received only a mumbled incoherence as I hurried away. Returning home felt like a surrender. The realization struck with chilling clarity. This was my reality, at least until professional help could be sought. A spike of impotent rage surged, the desire to shatter every mirror, every pane of glass, tempered by the chilling fear that it might make no difference. Water offered little solace. I paced, agitated, the faint whispers weaving through the silence, punctuated by inexplicable cold drafts that slithered past despite sealed windows. Cleaning became a desperate attempt at control. Scrubbing, wiping, sweeping, each mundane task interrupted by a sudden hissed name at my ear, jolting me, sending my heart racing. Night fell again, and with it, a weary resignation. I sat ensconced on the couch, refusing to look toward any potentially reflective surface, taped or covered. Yet a sense of movement persisted at the edges of my vision, fleeting shifts in the periphery. Muscles remained coiled tight, my throat constricted. Occasionally, I'd whip my head around, hoping to catch it, always finding nothing. Temporary, I told myself. Help is coming. Later, the necessity of brushing my teeth forced a confrontation. In the bathroom, I peeled back just enough of the towel to see the sink basin, studiously avoiding my own eyes in the sliver of exposed mirror. My name echoed, louder this time, sharper. My shoulders jumped involuntarily. Spitting toothpaste, rinsing quickly, head still bowed, I felt it. That distinct, bone-chilling coldness directly behind me. The overhead light flickered once, violently. With agonizing slowness, I forced myself to look up. My reflection stared back, its movements lagging now by a full half-second, a grotesque pantomime. And behind it, the dark shape solidified further, coalescing, hints of a featureless face swimming in the blur. My heart felt poised to burst. A ragged breath escaped my lips. The toothbrush slipped from my nerveless fingers, clattering into the sink. My reflection bent to retrieve it a moment after I did, perfectly out of sync. The shadow's outline seemed to twitch. A low, grating sound filled the air, like fingernails dragged across stone. A strangled cry tore from me as I stumbled backward, fleeing the bathroom, leaving the light burning against the encroaching horror. Now, I sit here on the couch, committing this account to paper, needing to anchor the details before the appointment. Even as I write, I feel the cold air caressing the back of my neck. No fan is running. The windows remain shut tight. The whispers persist, low and sibilant, reciting my name. They pause only when I hold my breath, resuming the instant I exhale. My chest is a knot of tension. My eyes burn with fatigue and fear. A tremor runs ceaselessly through my body, sweat trickling down my spine despite the chill. What tonight holds, I cannot fathom. Whether the coverings offer any true defense seems increasingly doubtful, yet I will maintain them. I will sit here, bathed in the glare of every light, until the sun returns. Then, the appointment. I am resolved to understand this, to fight it. Yet, the thought of relocation, of finding a place devoid of reflective surfaces, an impossible sanctuary, whispers its own despair. For now, the struggle is to remain calm, coherent. My hands feel distant, numb, my head swims. How much more can be endured before something irrevocably breaks? I cling to the hope of dawn, praying the shadow, the whispers, do not intensify further. If they do, remaining in this apartment, this besieged space, may become utterly untenable. The descent into the manor's underbelly promised nothing more than decay and quietude, yet what greeted me was a clandestine dominion of timber and iron. The air hung thick, saturated with the cloying scent of forgotten newsprint moldering in damp confinement. My torch beam sliced through the gloom, illuminating phalanxes of shelves burdened with books, their spines uniformly veiled in grime. These shelves ascended into shadow, swallowing the light, denying my gaze any glimpse of a ceiling. An unnerving vertigo stirred within me. I felt like an interloper in a space never intended for mortal eyes. A constriction tightened my chest, my own pulse a frantic drum against my eardrums. My purpose here, amidst the detritus of this crumbling estate, was the pursuit of rare manuscripts. Local whispers hinted at the former occupant's penchant for peculiar acquisitions. Folklore. Most townsfolk scoffed, but the allure of discovery had drawn me. Shoving aside splintered crates and water-damaged cartons, my eye caught a metallic gleam behind the carcass of a wardrobe. Not the anticipated strongbox or trunk, but a ponderous door of age-darkened oak embedded directly into the stonework. Its hinges were colossal, primitive things, the handle fashioned into a bronze serpent coiled in perpetual slumber. It radiated an antiquity that dwarfed everything else in the cellar. It resisted my pull, locked fast. A brief search revealed a sliver of rusted iron hanging like a forgotten accusation from a nail beneath a sagging, rotted shelf. The key turned with a grating protest, the door groaning open on its immense hinges, the sound reverberating through the subterranean silence like a drawn-out moan. A draft, unnaturally cold, slithered past my arms. Beyond lay a short flight of stone steps descending into a vast chamber. My light swept across the expanse, revealing a subterranean scriptorium. Walls lined floor to indeterminate height with shelving, crammed with volumes of every conceivable size and shape. Some stacked precariously, others shrouded in decaying cloth. The atmosphere was a compound of mildewed paper and something else, indefinable, perhaps the ghost of decaying leather. At the chamber's far end, a barricaded alcove commanded attention, secured by heavy, rusted chains. The links, thick as a man's wrist, crisscrossed a set of formidable wooden doors. Drawn closer, my footfalls echoing unnervingly on the flagstones, I reached out. The chains clanked dully, leaving a gritty orange residue on my gloved palms. The padlock clinging to them looked primordial. From my pack, I withdrew a small pry bar, a constant companion in my explorations of derelict structures, indispensable for stubborn portals. A few sharp, leveraged jolts, and the ancient padlock yielded with a brittle snap. The echo of fracturing metal frayed my already taut nerves. Taking a steadying breath, I wrestled the heavy chains aside. My torch flickered erratically. A sharp rap against its caisson restored the beam. The passage revealed beyond the doors was a mere gullet, barely wide enough for passage without turning my shoulders sideways. Its walls were punctuated by small, recessed niches, each cradling a solitary volume or a sheaf of brittle papers, like ossuaries for forgotten thoughts. Gossamer veils of cobwebs drifted from the low ceiling. A tremor traced my spine as I crossed the threshold. The deeper I ventured, the more I became aware of the bizarre sigils adorning the book spines. They belonged to no alphabet I recognized. Some appeared crudely scratched, others meticulously inked in a pigment faded to the color of dried blood. Running a hesitant finger across one cover, I recoiled from its texture. Strangely uneven, like scarred skin, puckered in places as if by fire. A distinct chill permeated the air now, my exhalations plumed faintly visible. Silence reigned, save for the rhythmic drip of unseen water somewhere behind me and the soft crunch of my own boots on the gritty floor. Perhaps 10 feet in, the passage widened into a small, stark room dominated by a central stone table. Loose pages lay scattered upon its surface, partially obscured by a shroud of dust-laden cloth. Lifting the covering released a puff of stale air and revealed sketches of such grotesque abnormality they defied natural classification. Creatures depicted with impossibly elongated limbs, faces vacant save for a multitude of eyes, or torsos wrenched into mockeries of anatomy. The linework was rough, agitated, as though rendered in desperate haste. A visceral instinct screamed at me to avert my gaze, to retreat, yet morbid fascination compelled me to lift a single sheet. Its corners were stained with a dark, desiccated substance. Turning it to the light, a jolt went through me. The depicted entity possessed a gaping maw where its eyes should have been, and a solitary, unblinking orb glared from the space a mouth would normally occupy. Carefully, I replaced the disturbing page and cast my light around the confined space. Against one wall, a stone pedestal supported a small stack of books. The uppermost volume was bound in thick, coarse leather, its cover dominated by an embossed symbol, an inverted triangle, each vertex sprouting barbed lines. My hand, betraying a tremor, reached out. I opened the cover. The text within pulsed with the same alien script, the slanted, unnerving characters seeming to writhe on the page, inducing a subtle nausea. Flipping through brittle leaves revealed more illustrations, some rendered with such intricate, nightmarish detail that my throat constricted. They possessed a disquieting vitality, as if poised to crawl from the vellum should I stare too long. Swallowing hard against a rising bile, I snapped the book shut and stepped back. My torch flickered again, more violently this time. In the ensuing momentary darkness, I thought I heard a faint rustling, perhaps the disturbed cloth settling near my feet, perhaps not. The corridor behind me seemed to have swallowed the light, pressing closer. Shoving the scattered, horrific pages aside with my foot, repulsed by the thought of touching them again, I felt my heart hammer against my ribs. My skin prickled, my shirt clinging damply to my back. Enough. I turned and retraced my steps, hurrying past the towering shelves of the entombed library, ascending the stairs, emerging back into the relative normalcy of the manor's basement. Later that night, ensconced in the false security of my own home, I attempted to dispel the lingering unease. A mug of strong coffee steamed on the kitchen table as I tried to process the subterranean library, its architect, its curator, the purpose behind its concealment. My thoughts raced. Seeking refuge in the mundane, I picked up a familiar hardcover on local history, hoping the familiar print would soothe my frayed nerves. After only a few pages, I noticed them. Faint graphite whispers in the margins. Annotations from a previous owner, I assumed initially. Then, a chill traced its way up my spine. Some of the scribbled symbols bore an unsettling resemblance to the script in that hidden corridor. My chest tightened. Flipping ahead, I found more. Faint, almost apologetic loops and twists, unlike any conventional handwriting. With a sharp intake of breath, I slapped the book shut, laying it flat on the table. A sensation like swallowed ice spread through my gut. In the days that followed, the phenomenon intensified. Every book I opened, regardless of genre or provenance, even volumes owned for decades, bore the strange markings. Sometimes concise lines of indecipherable text, sometimes small, hasty sketches mirroring the grotesque figures from the corridor. Often, a single cryptic symbol scratched into a corner, indelible, resistant to my thumb's frantic rubbing, seemingly fused with the paper fibers. My skin crawled with each new discovery. The impulse to purge my collection warred with a deeper, unnameable reluctance. One evening, driven by a desperate need for understanding, I resolved to analyze the annotations systematically. Armed with a notebook, I began meticulously transcribing every alien glyph, every peculiar squiggle onto clean sheets. Initially, they appeared random, scattered, but gradually patterns emerged, recurring shapes swam into focus. There it was again, the inverted barbed triangle from the leather-bound book. My pulse surged. Dismissing it as pareidolia, I seized another book, flipping pages frantically. And there, nestled beside a page number, small yet unmistakable, the same sigil. I circled it with a trembling red pen. My breathing grew shallow. The ticking clock on the kitchen wall amplified to a deafening rhythm. I contacted Elias, a friend whose expertise lay in obscure texts. Under the guise of discovering annotated books at an estate sale, I invited him over. He peered through his loupe, frowning at the marginalia. The script resonated with something archaic, he admitted, yet remained unidentifiable. His questions about their origin met my practiced evasion. He suggested consulting a linguistics professor at the university. I nodded vaguely, harboring no intention of pursuing it. A burgeoning paranoia warned against drawing further attention. These markings felt intimate, directed, a clandestine communication intended solely for me. Day by day, the annotations grew bolder, more assertive. Opening a cookbook or a travelogue revealed entire paragraphs woven around the printed text, the graphite lines darkening, gaining confidence. At night, I sometimes perceived a phantom scratching, the whisper of lead on paper, always ceasing the instant I strained to hear. Sleep offered little respite, becoming a turbulent sea of fragmented nightmares populated by the corridor's monstrous denizens. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, startled by every innocuous creak of the floorboards, every groan of the plumbing. The house felt alien, watchful. My thoughts invariably circled back to the chained alcove, the disturbing sketches. Had I inadvertently tethered some unseen presence to my curiosity, carried something intangible back with me? In a futile attempt at containment, I gathered the afflicted books and locked them within a sturdy chest in the attic. The following morning, ascending the narrow stairs to check, I found the chest gaping open. The books were inexplicably restored to their usual places on my living room shelves, mocking my efforts. A cold sweat beaded on my forehead. I knew. I had locked it. The key remained undisturbed in my dresser drawer. Backing slowly away, I descended, my head swimming, jaw clenched tight. At the kitchen sink, I splashed cold water on my face, gripping the porcelain edge until my knuckles shone white. Rationalizations warred with visceral certainty. Perhaps I'd forgotten, perhaps I'd sleepwalked, but my gut screamed otherwise. That afternoon, selecting a random paperback, an old pulp mystery, I settled nervously in the living room. My heart hammered as I flipped through the pages. The margins were now dense with the invasive, twisting script, page after relentless page. My eyes scanned the alien text, and abruptly, a specific configuration of symbols leaped out, repeated with insistent frequency across several pages. Though the language remained opaque, the shape resonated with a chilling familiarity, evoking the English word, return. A command, perhaps? My mouth turned to dust. A dreadful necessity solidified within me. I had to go back. Grabbing only my torch, pry bar, and gloves, propelled by a mixture of terror and compulsion, I drove back to the derelict manor. The broken gate hung askew as before. The basement entrance yielded easily. Descending the stairs into the hidden library felt like plunging back into a recurring nightmare. The frigid air embraced me. My torch beam cut through the oppressive dark, revealing the corridor entrance still agape. The discarded chains line like metallic serpents on the stone floor. I stepped inside, pulse thundering in my temples. The familiar odor, damp earth and decay, assaulted my senses. I advanced towards the small chamber at the corridor's terminus. The stone table stood sentinel, the scattered pages undisturbed. The very walls seemed to exhale, pressing closer. I scanned the horrific sketches again, searching for a visual echo of the word haunting my books at home. My light danced over the same vile anatomies, the same frantic lines. Then, beneath the table, unseen before, lay a fresh leaf. Crouching, I retrieved it. More script, darker, bolder than the others, the ink glistening wetly under my beam, as if freshly inscribed. My hand shook violently as I recognized recurring shapes mirroring the symbols now infesting my own library. A soft, scuffing sound erupted behind me. I spun, torch beam slashing wildly. The corridor stretched empty, yet the palpable sensation of being watched prickled my scalp. Edging forward, I swept the light across the room's periphery. Stillness. Taking ragged breaths, I tucked the newly found page into my jacket pocket. My heart felt poised to burst from my chest. One last, fearful glance at the shadowed shelves lining the walls, and I turned to flee. Glancing repeatedly over my shoulder, convinced of pursuit, my foot caught on a loose flagstone. I stumbled, crashing hard, agony shooting up my leg from my bruised knee. Stifling a groan, I limped raggedly out of the corridor, up the stairs, through the basement, and into the fading daylight. I didn't pause to secure the oak door. Escape was my only imperative. Home offered no solace. My body remained coiled with tension, shirt plastered to my back with cold sweat. I withdrew the page from my jacket. The script covered it densely, lines intersecting in complex, unsettling patterns. At the bottom, small but distinct, resided the inverted, barbed triangle. My mouth was intolerably dry. I tossed the page onto the kitchen table and began to pace, agitation preventing stillness. My pulse refused to slow. Eventually, a semblance of calm allowed closer inspection. I noticed faint indentations along the edges, as if inscribed with tremendous pressure. Turning it over revealed on the reverse the pale, ghostly impression of a handprint. Smaller than mine, yet the fingers seemed unnaturally long, slender. I traced it with a fingertip. The paper felt unnervingly cold, almost damp to the touch. I dropped it as if burned. My mind reeled in a vortex of confusion and profound dread. Now, every book is a potential vessel. Opening one means confronting fresh invasions of script, entire chapters consumed, the alien text swirling around the familiar print like parasitic vines. I cannot decipher them, yet they radiate a desperate urgency. The phantom scribbling persists, a nocturnal susurrus just beyond my walls, always fading upon investigation. Gooseflesh prickles my arms. Sudden weakness afflicts my legs. I find myself perpetually bracing for a figure to coalesce from the shadows, though only empty hallways and familiar furniture meet my gaze. Reading, once my sanctuary, is now fraught with peril. Relaxation is a forgotten country. My thoughts constantly return to that subterranean corridor, the chained alcove, the monstrous drawings. How does one stop this insidious inscription? It manifests irrespective of my will, and the thought of its inexorable growth is a constant torment. Burning the books feels like a dangerous provocation, potentially unleashing something worse. So I endure, coexisting with the unseen scribe, the unintelligible messages etched into my life. My hands tremble whenever I approach a bookshelf, anticipating the next wave of symbols, the next incomprehensible mandate. I feel irrevocably trapped, acutely aware that I crossed a threshold in that buried library from which there can be no return. This is my reality now. No answers, only proliferating questions and a quiet, pervasive fear. Every blank surface holds a latent threat. Every nocturnal rustle arrests my breath. I cling to the fading hope of waking one morning to find the words gone, the scribbles vanished, my life purged of their haunting presence. But they remain, embedded in the paper, etched into my psyche, filling my waking hours with formless dread. I started something down there in the dark, something I was never meant to comprehend, let alone finish. And it is not finished with me.